and today we're going to be talking about, are you an empath and what is codependency? Essentially what an empath is someone who has that extra level of sensitivity. So they can usually sense or feel a vibe around something or feel the emotions of someone else a little bit more keenly than what the average person might. So an empath is someone who can really pick up in others what they're going through and if they're struggling with something, and really just have that extra sense for emotions, essentially. Sometimes that means we're a bit more sensitive than your regular person, and we like a lot of stimulation can be a bit too much sometimes, like crowds or just being in a lot of like heavy energy can sometimes be a lot. I know with everything with COVID, a lot of the fear energy, I kind of did feel that, and I was exhausted for like months on end. You don't even mean to do it, but sometimes you just walk out and you talk to someone and sometimes you can take on their energy. If you've ever heard of energy vampires as well, sometimes we give away our energy because we want to help and we want to look after other people and we care, and a lot of the time empaths do have a lot of empathy, hence the name, and you want to be that caring, compassionate person who looks after other people, and they're in that is an energy exchange where sometimes we're taking on that heavy energy in response to wanting to look after and help others. So I guess as part of being an empath, part of it's being mindful of your energy levels and looking out for yourself, as well as giving in an amount that suits you. So that might be, I don't know, giving 2 or 3 times a week, but on those other nights you look after yourself instead and you pull back because you know that works for you. Or it might be you work in a job where it's a helping profession or a healing profession, so you are out and talking with people every day, so you're mindful of your energy when you come home and you just kind of take that time to relax. As empaths can get drained and tired quite easily and take on those emotions, those heavy emotions. I don't know if you've ever had an experience where you've been in a really good mood and then you've gone and you've called someone and you've gotten off that phone call and you've just been like, wow, I feel really flat after that. Like that was a real heavy conversation, or there was a lot going on in that and I'm really feeling for that person, and you've kind of lost your buzz that you had maybe an hour ago. That's a perfect example of taking on other people's emotions. Like what they're going through is not necessarily affecting you, but because you care and because you have that compassion, sometimes it can get drawn into our energy as well. So if you're someone who's been through that before, you're probably a bit of an empath. In relationships, there's a lot of strengths that empaths have. So they're very in tune with their partner's needs. They're very compassionate and loving towards their partner. Like there's so much love to give when you're an empath. They are really in tune. So if your partner's having a rough day or they're just really angry for no apparent reason, you'll be able to pick that up and point that out and be like, hey, what's going on with you? Maybe even before the other person notices in themselves, and they can sense when something's wrong. They can really be there for those people even before the person's ready to even reach out and ask for help, which again can be something to be mindful of. With everything there's light and dark. Like I used to think my emotional sensitivity was a bit of a weakness, but I think in my years that I've realized I was an empath and I've learned that it's also probably my greatest strength. It really helps me connect in with my clients when I'm working with people, and really give them that time and that care that they might need in certain situations, and be able to just pick things up that other people maybe might miss in my personal life, or know when someone's a bit upset but not really showing it, and being able to extend the olive branch in those situations and see if that person's ready to talk or not. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to being an empath, but I think we also have to be mindful of the pitfalls as well. As with anything, there's light and there's dark, and I think one of those things is that there's a connection between being an empath and also being codependent. So what does codependency mean? Essentially, it means that you are very dependent on your partner or someone else in your life to help you make big decisions, to look after you for approval. A lot of the time we look to others to see, are we doing the right thing? Are we good enough? How is this all going? And when they're like, oh, I love you, babe, or something, it's enough to be like, okay, we're validated, we're lovable, we're okay. Often with codependency, that'll be a factor as well. And also there's this lack of sense of self. So you might not have a really clear idea of your identity or who you are as a person on your own, because maybe you've always been in and out of relationships, or maybe you see it in a lot of couples where one person will mesh into the other person when they get really close and become a relationship as opposed to just a single person. And often what's happening here is 2 people join together, and it's sometimes a lot easier in a relationship to go with the flow and to go with what your partner wants to do. And if they're really interested in, I don't know, cars, to start learning about cars so you can actually have and hold a conversation with them about that, even though it's something that maybe prior to that you never really had an interest in. But it's not only interest, it's also our values and what we believe in. So for example, I had a family member who got in a relationship, and before she got in that relationship, obviously I've known her for years, she was telling me how she really wanted to travel and see the world, and that was something that was on the cards for her, and she was really keen to make some plans around that in a few years' time. And then she got in this amazing relationship, and he was someone who wasn't really keen on travel, and so she kind of just dropped it all together, and she just decided, I won't worry about it, I'm happy in my relationship, I don't need to travel. And I think this is a good example of maybe our value system enmeshing with someone else's value system, and then we take that on board. And the reason we do that is it keeps us safe, one. There's no conflict when you go with the flow and you just take things on board. And also, the person's not going to leave us if we're kind of agreeing with a lot of what they say. There's less conflict, there's less arguments, those kind of things. So I guess there's that argument for it as well, that the relationship might last longer if we just go with the flow all the time. Essentially, I think it's that safety thing, that unconscious wanting to feel safe and not wanting to be around conflict, that is the main key motivator and driver for that. So the key link between being an empath and being a codependent, and how do they mesh, is that because we're an empath and we feel other people's emotions, what that means is we're going to be anticipating what the other person is thinking of us a lot of the time. So we might say something. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you've said something and you've just felt the vibration in the room either drop, or just the awkwardness, or something. People have not been happy with what you've said, and you've just been like, oh, and there's that temptation to backtrack there and be like, oh, I take it back, or downplay it, or pretend it's not as opinionated as maybe what you said. So because we feel those emotions and we can sense those things in others, we often will tailor our approach to things, be a certain version of ourselves that we think the other person wants us to be. And because we care and because we're compassionate, we want to make other people happy, and we want to be that person they want us to be. So I don't know, it might be in a parent relationship that you play the straight A student who always has their career together, when really maybe you want to change careers and you've been wanting to for years, but you just don't want to tell your parent that because you know that they'll get triggered and they'll start telling you all the reasons why you shouldn't change careers because you're in a steady job and you've got a good income and all that jazz. Or in a relationship, maybe you're just saying, oh, I'm happy to eat Thai food, whatever, I don't mind, like the whole restaurant situation, I don't want to choose a restaurant. And maybe that's to keep the peace and just to not have conflict ensue because it's just something you just don't like to do, and really you hate Thai food deep down. So often we change who we are to kind of look after that other person and to be the person they want us to be. You're trying to keep your relationship going, so you're going to jump onto that as a codependent person because it's something that is just natural for you. Where this comes from is we care so much about everyone else's needs and looking after everyone else that often we put ourselves last, and we often go, oh, I don't mind, I'll do whatever. And this is where we kind of don't find relationship satisfaction because we're constantly changing and shifting who we think we need to be, and we're so worried about the persona that we're putting out. And you have to do it with every single person, right? So like you have to be a completely different person with all these different people and keep up that persona all the time. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And we're usually not happy deep down because we're not allowed to be our true selves. We're not allowed to voice our opinions in that space. And this means we can never be truly vulnerable with a partner, and we can never have that be accepted and feel that love when we do have a flaw and it is accepted from our partner. How do we know if we're codependent? I think a key thing is maybe you lack a sense of self-belief. So you don't know if you can do it, or a big decision comes up and you don't believe in yourself enough to be able to make that decision and make it confidently despite whatever risks might be involved. Maybe you feel uncomfortable making decisions on your own, so you have to find someone, whether it's an expert or whether it's a partner or someone, to get their input and their advice before you make that decision because you just don't feel really confident doing it by yourself. When we are codependent in relationships, it is really hard to break up with people. Really hard. I've had the interesting experience where I decided I needed to break up with someone that just wasn't working between us, and I couldn't really see that improving, and I just knew they weren't right for me, right? And I went and did it, and I broke up with this person, and I was bawling my eyes out. I was crying more than they were crying, and they were the ones who got dumped. It made no sense. And part of that, I think, was my empathy, and I was just so worried about how they were going to feel and like hurting them, and I hated hurting them, and I just didn't want to do that. But I knew I had to in order for my own happiness to be a thing. And then part of that was also, I didn't realize I was codependent in that relationship, but I was, because it was a really rough time in my life. I wasn't very happy. And so I was using that relationship as a source of happiness and a source of approval that I was lovable enough. And so when I broke up with him, I not only broke up with him, but I also ripped out my coping strategy, which was codependence, to deal with my emotional problems. And so there was a lot of pain there because I'd been using this coping strategy for so long and not even realizing that I was using it, and it was helping me deal with my emotions. And by getting rid of that source of happiness that I had, I suddenly felt that I was a bit empty, and I had a bit of a void in me, and I didn't know what to do with that. And that was a bit of a struggle in itself. And I think this is why you see couples in relationships constantly breaking up and getting back together, and breaking up and getting back together. Because we break up, we know we have a good reason for breaking up, I'm sure, but then we do it, and there's this sense of loss and this sense of void, and I don't want to do it all on my own. I don't want to have to make decisions by myself. That's scary. You know, it's uncomfortable to sit in that space of, now I don't feel lovable because I don't have someone giving me that love anymore, and I don't know how to fix that within myself. So the temptation is to get back with that partner again to fix that codependent part of us, right? Even though we know that there's another part of us that'll be unhappy in that relationship, even if it continues, or that the problems might continue that we couldn't resolve the first time. So that is why, as empaths, we just need to be mindful of codependency, and mindful of, is this something that I am struggling with at the moment? And sometimes it's a bit unconscious, and sometimes it's more conscious. But that's why I wanted to bring it to you today, so that we could have a discussion around it, and so that it can be pointed out to you, so that if you do have a breakup and you're just wondering why you're struggling so much with it, maybe you can start looking into things like codependency. Great. So let me know if you've got any questions, any comments. I'm always happy to talk about this kind of stuff.